We're live. Welcome, everybody, to Gospel Tangents and LDS Faith Journeys. If you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, please let me know. It's time for our bi-monthly LDS Faith Journeys episode. And I wasn't very good at scheduling, and I thought, you know what? Actually, I had an interview with Jeff Strong from he's a new author that we were supposed to have a thing, and I messed up, and then anyway he messed up. So he's got a new book called Torn, and it's about LDS Disaffiliation. And I thought, it would be really interesting to compare the different books. There's 4 new books out: Bridges by David Osler, Torn, Jeff Strong, The Next Mormons, Jana Reese and Benjamin Knoll, and Goodbye Religion by Ryan Cragen. And so I thought we should, it would be fun to compare those. And with the magic of AI, they can do all sorts of things. So if you're listening, pop in a comment. I got to remember how to do this, and tell us who you are. Well, I guess we'll see who you are and where you're watching from. And if you have any questions about disaffiliation, please let me know. And we're going to dive into this presentation, and let's dive in right now. Let's see, does that work? All right. So what the Great Disaffiliation? We're going to synthesize 4 landmark tests to understand the modern faith exodus, shatter cultural myths, and build bridges of radical empathy. So let's see here. Now, so here's the 4 books. Oh, David just covered up their bridges. But anyway, so the 4 books that I wanted to talk about are Torn by Jeff Strong. It's kind of a cultural lens. He focuses on the soil of belonging and relational crisis, driving a massive wave of disaffiliation. Bridges, if you remember David Osler, I had him on, it's now been several years. And he's kind of has a pastoral lens. It's a plea for leaders and members to cross the empathy gap and minister to those who are experiencing agonizing faith crises. The Next Mormons by Jana Reese and Benjamin Knoll. That's a data-driven insights into how millennials and Gen Z are reshaping faith. Oh, you know what? I'm not sure if my slides are advancing. Maybe they are. Hopefully you guys are following along with me. Anyway, let me read that again. Data-driven insights into how millennials and Gen Z are reshaping faith through shifting values and delayed life milestones. And then the societal lens, Ryan Cragen and Jesse Smith with Goodbye Religion. This is more of a macro sociological view of American secularization and the healthy reality of post-religious life. Now, the first 3 books are focused mainly on Mormons. Ryan and Jesse's book focuses on all of American religion, and so that's one of the differences there. Now, one of the things that Jeff said that I know has gotten some play is Jeff said that 40% of active faithful members have left since 2000. I don't think that I find that number interesting. I'm not certain. that number just feels high to me. He talks about it and with some other studies, with Harvard's study and a few other things, but it just seems a little bit high to me, and I'm not entirely sure if that is accurate. But at any rate, the Next Mormons, according to AI, which helped me make these slides, it validates the drops, noting that millennial religious loyalty has plummeted to just 46%. So that's a different measure, and it's focusing on millennials, whereas Jeff's book focuses on the entire church. Bridges cites a Pew Research study showing a 28% net outflow, and a massive generational drop in retention. That number seems better to me, although I'm not entirely sure if it's accurate either. And then Goodbye Religion confirms the national macro trend. The religiously unaffiliated nuns have climbed to 39% in the U.S. And so, anyway, whatever, 28 to 46, I guess, kind of depending on how you slice it. The point is the exodus is not an anomaly. It's a systemic, statistically validated reality across pastoral, cultural, and demographic measures. And so these are the 4 books kind of side by side. And kind of Torn is kind of a macro relational focus. Bridges is a micro pastoral focus. The Next Mormons is a demographic focus. And then Goodbye Religion is a sociological perspective. Ryan and Jesse are sociologists. And so their ways of looking at leaving are a little bit different. Torn, a fracture in the community ecosystem is kind of how it views leaving. Bridges views leaving as an agonizing, deeply isolating personal grief among those who leave. The Next Mormons is driven by social, doctrinal, and authoritative friction. And then Goodbye Religion, a natural, often healthy transition to new meaning. In that case, I talked to Ryan on the podcast, so I've actually had I've had Ryan, Jana, and Ben, David, and I'm getting Jeff Strong on hopefully this week. So I've basically had all 4 authors on, or will have them on. And so definitely Ryan, who comes from a secularization point of view, views this as healthy. I think the others are not as happy about that. Core recommendations. I thought this was interesting. One of the things that Jeff said, I remember at the end of his book, was like, I'm not going to give you some recommendations, but he does say we need to shift from enforcing conformity to cultivating belonging, which I think is a good message. Bridges says we need to listen without defensiveness, and I think that's incredibly difficult for everyone, no matter which side you're on. We need to mourn with those that mourn. And so the Next Mormons, Jana and Benjamin, say we need to adapt institutional expectations to retain the modern youth. She focuses a little bit on the younger generation. And then Goodbye Religion, recognize secular individuals as highly moral and engaged. And so those are kind of the different perspectives of the 4 groups. Now, I want to talk about the myth. I think all of them talk about this. There's a big myth right now that the reason why people leave is because they're lazy or want to sin. And I can't tell you how many times I will get an ex-Mormon that comes on and refers to lazy learners, because I know that was a recent conference talk. And the reality is people who leave who are often the most devout. Many leave due to deep doctrinal study or feeling the institution lacks moral alignment. One of the interesting things, I was a little surprised. I was at the Mormon Social Science Association, and there was I believe she was a bachelor's student. She was doing a study on return missionaries that were leaving. And it's funny because she cited this 40% that apparently I think comes from Jeff. And I think John Delaney, she mentioned that Delaney had mentioned it. She didn't know where John got it from. I'm pretty sure John got it from Jeff's book, Torn. I'm not entirely certain on that, but I think so. And I think a lot of us were like, that seems a little high. And when I have my interview with Jeff, we're going to talk more about that number and make sure that I understand where it's coming from. But, one of the interesting things when we talk about deep doctrinal study or feelings the institution lacks moral alignment, I think there's kind of 2 things there. I recently talked with some polygamists, the Ericksons, Joshua, Charlotte, and Melissa. And one of the things that Melissa said, which really kind of struck me, was she had been studying the scriptures on her own and had come to conclude that what we teach in Sunday school is not what's in the scriptures. And that's one of the things that helped lead her to a life of polygamy. And I remember asking someone at the MSSA conference if they would be interested, because the student was still trying to gather responses, and it was a kind of a snowball sample. So it wasn't statistically representative of everyone. It was, kind of more of a convenient sample, trying to who she could get. And I said, hey, I know some polygamists. Would you be interested in them? And the answer was no. Now, I didn't talk to the student, so I don't know what the student's response was, but I talked to one of the advisors, and I was really surprised. I do think personally that when we do these studies, especially, and I do think that is one of the limitations of Jeff's study in Torn, was it was an internet sample, and I think you're going to get different responses from people on the internet than you are going to get in a statistically representative sample like the Next Mormons. I thought they were fantastic. And I do think there was some significant difference between Jeff's Torn survey and Jana and Ben's The Next Mormons survey. And I know Jana and Ben are coming out with a new book, Next Mormons 2. I don't know what it's called. But anyway, it'll be kind of, think of it as the sequel to The Next Mormons. But I think a lot of times, especially... I'm trying to say this without being political, but, people on the internet, for the most part, are often more conservative. And I do think in samples like this, such as Jeff's sample, I do believe that it was more representative of the more progressive types. And it was weird to me that this advisor said she wasn't interested in kind of the right wing, the conservative, and I was taken aback by it. And so I do think I think number one, I think the polygamous groups are way understudied, and not just the polygamous groups, but you've got kind of the John Birchers and the the apocalyptic people, kind of the Julie Rowe kind of people, or even Denver Snuffer, some of those kind of people. I don't think those people are studied nearly enough. And, those are people that you would look at the deep doctrinal study. Not to say that there aren't people on the left that do that, but I do think that people on the right aren't studied enough. And I would be interested in that. But I think a lot of people want to study the people that are like them, not the people that are not like them. And I want to study them all. I think that's interesting. Another myth of why people disaffiliate, they are simply offended. So the reality is these people experience a profound loss of trust and a crisis of belonging. They have a deep hunger that cannot be satisfied with shallow food. That's if I were to put myself in somewhere, I mean, I'm still affiliated, but I don't like the shallow food. I need to study something deeper. And then the third myth that I want to talk about is the myth that people's lives will fall apart without religion. Ryan Cragen really takes this on, and he says that secular individuals remain highly engaged in society, maintain strong moral compasses, and continue charitable giving. And so anyway, the myth and the reality, I wonder personally, because I think these myths, especially among members of the church, are so ingrained that they're hard to get rid of. And I think the reality, I think there's a reason why we want to say, hey, if you leave the church, your life's going to fall apart. There's, it's motivated reasoning to offer that as a reason. And the reality is, Jeff Strong talks about that. Jana Reese does. David Lossler does, and Ryan Cragen does as well. So let's talk a little bit about the agony of exit. People feel alone and isolated, sometimes angry. They're going through the grieving process, and when a person does want to leave, their entire world gets turned upside down. And so when the people leave, it's a period of terrible loneliness. And, the person's entire foundation of faith is agonizing. I did just talk to a friend just this weekend. He told me something that absolutely astounded me, and said something to the effect of that he knew someone, or like he'd heard this multiple times. This is astounding to me. I cannot tell you how astounding this is to me. And a family member had left the church for whatever reason. And then the church member basically cut them off. Now, we hear lots of stories about cutting them off. But the reason is what astounded me, that the church member cut them off primarily due to, they said, well, did the temple recommend question, do you affiliate with any apostates? I'm not saying that right way, but you get the idea. I mean, the question was originally kind of, back in the 30s, was there to say, hey, are you affiliating with polygamists, basically? But this modern church member said, well, I can't associate with my brother or sister or whoever it was because they're no longer affiliated. And I want to be able to answer that question. And I was like, are you kidding me? That's unbelievable, to cut off a family member because they left the church and now you don't want to affiliate with them. I'm like, are you kidding me? That's not a Christian thing to do. And I think if such things are really happening, we gotta kill that message like in the bud. That's, oh my gosh, that was shocking to me. It's important to remember that leaving is rarely a sprint towards freedom. It's a terrifying collapse of a worldview, community, and family security. These people are grieving, and it's important that we keep them in our lives if we ever want them to come back. I can't imagine closing the door on somebody and being like, I can't affiliate with you because you left the church. And then, like, do we not understand the story of the Good Samaritan? Do we not, the lost sheep, you go after the one, not you leave the 99, you go after the one? Like, wow. To me, the idea of closing the door on a family member because they left the church, I can't tell you how upsetting that is to me. I was just like, you got to be kidding me. But I'm sure that story was correct. I'm sure that it happens. And it's just something that kind of boggles my mind a little bit. I see we have a comment here from Saints and Sources. The church has to grow both culturally and doctrinally with time. The church of 1960 would not be tolerated by the saints of 2000. Maybe. I don't know if I agree with that. But anyway, the church of today will not be satisfying to the saints of 2040. I will say certain saints. I'm not sure I totally agree with that. But yeah, interesting perspective. I get the general idea. And Saints and Sources, thank you for leaving the comment. By the way, Saints and Sources, let me know where you're watching from. Let's see here. Why the foundation cracks. Now this one I think is an interesting thing. This one comes a lot from Jeff Strong's book, History and Doctrinal. He talks about the four waves, and I believe this is coming from his book. You've got a doctrinal and a historical wave, discovering troubling, previously obscured church history, such as polygamy, race problems, varied first vision accounts. Definitely, there are people that fit into that definition. One of the things that Jeff said that of the 40% who leave, this was the largest group. And my guess, and Jeff does acknowledge that he's got 15,000 responses, which is huge. It's a huge survey, but I think it's representative of internet Mormons. I don't think it's representative of all Mormons. I was really surprised that was the largest group. Not surprised that that's on the internet, because those are the people you hear on the internet. But if you've got internet people answering this, I don't think those people are representative of all people. But certainly this is a big important segment, I guess I would say, of internet users that they are really bothered by the historical and the doctrinal history. Another wave is relational, a systemic failure of belonging, a culture that prioritizes conformity, connection, leaving the deep hunger unsatisfied. So I think, this is definitely a big piece of why certain people leave. I think it's affecting people on the left and on the right, the fundamentalists, the secularists or progressive people. All of those people have trouble with belonging. Social and cultural is another wave. Acute friction over LGBTQ rights, traditional gender roles, and the marginalization of non-traditional families. I would argue this is more of a left-sided position than maybe a right-sided position. Although, I do think I remember talking with Ann Wild. She was my first independent Mormon fundamentalist. And, they were trying at the time, now it's been sort of legalized in Utah, that they were kind of for gay marriage, which I wouldn't have expected, because they wanted it to be, they wanted polygamy to be decriminalized. And so they were like, well, if you decriminalize gay marriage, or if you legalize gay marriage, that'll make it better for us. So I thought that was, strange bedfellows. I thought that was interesting. And then authoritative, a generational shift in epistemology. Millennials trust internal spiritual experiences over external institutional mandates. So anyway, that's interesting. Let's see, we've got a couple of comments here. If I can figure out how to get my mouse to work. Saints and sources watching from Highland, thank you. To clarify, not total change, things like race or women's rights and understanding prophetic fallibility, among others. Okay, yeah. So those are the things in the church today that will not be satisfying in 40 years or whatever. Okay. Let's move on to the next slide here. Okay, so the demographic squeeze. So I think we got this more from the Next Mormons, the unmarried majority. I remember Jana and Ben talking about that a lot. A lot of times our singles or our divorced or whatever you want to say are marginalized in a theology that's hyper-focused on the nuclear family. Attendance and engagement drop severely among singles. Single adults often feel as children or projects. So I agree with that. I married late, much later than most people. And so I was single for a long time, and I totally identify with that. Millennials and Gen Z, only 46% attend, which means 54% are gone, right? Due to religious loyalty, they demand inclusivity, authenticity, egalitarianism, naturally clashing with exclusive hierarchical structures. And then women navigating patriarchy. These people are struggling with strictly defined gender roles and the lack of highly visible female ecclesiastical authority. I think Jana and Ben in the Next Mormons did a great job of covering these. And so this is more kind of a generational squeeze on why younger people are leaving more. The relational crisis. So defensiveness, meeting vulnerability and painful questions with arguments, apologetics, or immediate correction. I can't tell you. I've tried. I just forgot to change my slide there, didn't I? I can't tell you how many people are defensive. And, I will tell you from personal experience, especially with family members, that certain family members are very defensive about the church. And so they don't want you to bring up anything bad about the church or what they perceive as bad. Things like Mountain Meadows, shouldn't be talking about that. So there's an extreme amount of defensiveness. Other family members are very appreciative of being able to talk to me about those types of topics. And so, those are people who have either left or, wavering or that sort of a thing. And I don't know if somebody's defensive, how do you make them not defensive? Like, that's a skill. We all need to become psychology majors or something. I don't know. That's a skill that's very hard. Toxic certainty. I should have brought a drink. Fostering an environment where doubt cannot be safely voiced. Forcing members to suffer in silence. Now, oh, wow, this is interesting. I see Deb here from Iowa. For those who don't know Deb Luce, she's one of my favorite people. She's an evangelist in the community of Christ. And I do have, she has a follow-up comment here. I agree, as a widow, too many people want to fix me up with someone, or they question why I choose to be single. I think we talked about that in our interview. Deb. So it's interesting. And my question to Deb is, coming from a community of Christ perspective, do you see these same problems in your church that we see in the LDS church? I mean, these books are focused on the LDS church, but I wonder how much crosses over with other churches like Community of Christ and things like that. So let me know there. The toxic certainty, that was another question I had for Deb. Do you have toxic certainty in the Community of Christ? It seems like, at least from my perspective, when I attend church at the Community of Christ, there's a lot more room for doubts, like way more room than there is in the LDS church. But I wonder if there are still people in Community of Christ, and if there's anybody watching from any others, let me know. I'll throw that to everybody, not just Deb. But I'm curious how that works, because it seems to me, as an outsider of the Community of Christ, it seems to me you have a better environment for that. Labeling, treating struggling members as tares or projects to be fixed. Deb just kind of mentioned that, rather than equals to be loved. So I'm glad I popped that comment in there, Deb. Thank you. Conditional love, the ultimate fear realized, withholding family approval of community or access based on belief status. I talked about that just a moment ago. Like, we've got to get rid of conditional love. And I know we talk about unconditional love, but sometimes we don't practice what we preach, and we can be pretty terrible with conditional love. Cultivating the soil. So this is insights from the new book, Torn. I don't have a copy yet. I just had an e-copy. But so we need to shift, and he uses a lot of agricultural metaphors. And it's funny because I'm like, I'm not really a farmer, but I know that there's a lot of stuff in the Bible, the mustard seed and all that. I'm like, let's talk about airplanes like Uchtdorf does. Anyway, let's get some new things here. But anyway, we need to shift the cultural objective and from enforcing conformity to cultivating deep belonging. I totally agree with that. I guess my question to Jeff would be, especially in the LDS church, it's really a hierarchical organization, much more so than the Community of Christ, I would say. Or at least that's I can't speak authoritatively. I'm not a member of that church, but it seems like I personally think they do a better job. But how do we, as members from the bottom up, help change that culture? And it just feels like Another point he says here, a fortress cannot gather, it can only admit or exclude. And I know, with some of our history, with Mountain Meadows, with Hans Mill, with, all of the early problems, we did get a fortress mentality, and it's stuck with us for a long time, and we still have it. We need to, as Jeff says, make room for complexity. People will stay where they feel safe, belonging, bringing their whole authentic selves, not just their obedient, curated selves. So I agree. My main question is, how do we get church to be better for more people? Because I don't have a good answer for that personally. All right, now these are some ideas from the book Bridges by David Osler. I loved David's book. I thought it was fantastic. Build the bridge of empathy. One of the things, and I think this is great advice. We need to listen to understand. Jeff Strong says this as well. We need to drop the need to preach, fix, or correct. We need to seek first to understand, then to be understood. Could not agree more. We need to mourn with those that mourn. We need to fulfill the core baptismal covenant by entering their pain. Grieve the loss of their worldview alongside them. On Netflix, there's a TV show called Manifest, and it's been out a while. And I remember when it first came out, I got consumed with this. And this past week, I've been rewatching it. And it's so funny when you already know what the outcome's going to be because you've watched it before, to look at it. And there's a character named Zeke, and he develops this supernatural ability. I don't want to spoil it for you, but he develops this supernatural ability to feel other people's pain. He becomes an empath. He literally can counsel people, and he'll like hold their hands, and he will feel the fear that they fear, or the pain that they have, or the anger, or whatever. And I mean, and he actually takes it on. He's able to help calm them when they're fearful, or help them to be less angry, and because he takes their anger. In a way, one of the things I love about the TV show Manifest, is it's got such a diverse cast. They've got good Christians and bad Christians, and good atheists and bad atheists, and multiracial families. Like, some people would probably say it's probably one of the most progressive TV shows out there. I love it because you've got insincere religious people, and then you've got sincere religious people, and then you have what was the third one? Misguided. There's a misguided religious person that you wonder if she's mentally ill. But the atheists are just, they have the full range. Like it's great because if you're Christian or if you're atheist or whatever, like there's good atheists and bad atheists, and there's good Christians and bad Christians. And so it's really, as I looked at it, it was really fun to look at. So the point is, where I think when we talk about grieving their loss of worldview alongside them, I think that's difficult. Empathy is difficult. And I think I can say from my experience, sometimes I don't want to get close to people that are having a hard time because I don't want it to rub off. I don't want to feel as depressed as they feel. But there is a scriptural thing in Mosiah to literally to mourn with those that mourn. Like that's in the book of Mosiah. We need to do that, but it's difficult. And so I have empathy for members who have a hard time mourning with those who leave the church. But I hope that we can all develop a capacity to better mourn with those that mourn. Another thing, we need to validate their experiences. We need to focus on things like, say, I love you. I want to understand. We need to acknowledge the reality of their pain, and that will be the strongest tether you can offer. I remember on my mission there was a phrase that we said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I totally agree with that. I think that's, and that's important. I think we could all do a better job. And I would hope our church would help us to work on that, because I think they're hard skills. They're really hard skills to do well. We need to realign institutional expectations. These are insights from Jana and Ben's book, The Next Mormons. We need to modernize the timeline. Stop weaponizing singlehood. One of my neighbors, I was talking to her yesterday. Yeah, she was working in her yard. And she's a widow. And in fact, she told me she was dating this guy and they were getting back together. And I knew him because she had brought him to church in the past. And she said, dating after 60 is really hard. And people do want to set you up and whatever. And she's like, it sucks, and her husband had passed away. Gosh, it's probably been about 5 years now. But yeah, it's hard. We need to stop weaponizing singlehood. We need to acknowledge the realities of delayed marriage and non-traditional life paths without viewing them as failures. Since I mentioned that, maybe I will mention this. My father-in-law passed away last weekend, and the funeral was yesterday. And my wife's really struggling right now with that. And so anyway, once again, mourn with those that mourn. But a lot of times, we have these awful things that happen. And how do we make better room in our lives for those who are mourning? We need to rethink authority, recognize that younger generations interface with leadership differently. They are persuaded by love, vulnerability, and authenticity. They're not commanded by title alone. So I love Jana's book because she does focus on the younger generations more than most, I think. And so I think the and the younger generations are leaving at higher rates. And so this is an important demographic to be looking at. We also need to expand the narrative, create theological and cultural space for egalitarianism and social justice within the faith framework. I completely agree with all of those suggestions, and I hope we can all do better on that. Let's see here. We need to recognize the healthy exit. These are insights from Goodbye Religion. So this is Ryan Cragen and Jesse Smith's book. Morality does survive religion. Leaving the faith is rarely a catalyst for moral collapse. Although I do know some people that do have moral collapse, but that's not everybody. There are people that leave religion and do just fine. Let's see. Secularization frequently leads to new, profound pathways of meaning, charitable giving, and deep family devotion. That's one of the things that Ryan Cragen found in his book was, people don't just quit giving; they continue doing that sort of thing. And a non-believer's beliefs are as real to them as yours are to you. The goal remains unconditional love, regardless of religious affiliation. So if you have loved ones that leave for either atheism or for another church, whether that's a fundamentalist church or another Mormon church, we still need to love them. That's what Jesus would have us do. So the relational maintenance loop. So we need to acknowledge the macro reality. I still want to check this, but Jeff says the 40% exodus and shifting demographics are real. I'm still curious about that number. It still seems too high to me. I don't think my congregation has dropped by 40% since in the last 5 years. It's dropped certainly, but not that much. We need to strip away defensive myths, assume that those who step back are acting with deep moral integrity. We need to hold space for their grief and isolation without offering immediate apologetics. I know a lot of people that ask me, well, what do I say to this person? And I'm like, sometimes the best answer is, I don't know. It's tough. And then we need to redefine the borders of your community so that they still fit whether they believe perfectly or not. I think one of the, especially in the LDS church, one of the big concerns is that unbelief will affect other members. And I think that's a large reason why they are, people will exclude them. You know, I mean, I'm going to go back to the Ericksons for a minute because I remember the story they told was after they got excommunicated for participating in polygamy, they still kept going to church. And then after a while, they were asked to not come to church anymore. And I was like, what? Visitors welcome? But I think in their case, there was worry that they would infect other people to leave for fundamentalism, and that's probably why they were asked. Now, I know Karen Hyatt, she was excommunicated a while ago, within the last 6 months, I would say. And basically because she was advocating for polygamy revisionism. She, as far as I know, I haven't talked to her lately, but when I talked to her a month or two ago, she said that her ward treats her well, and that's fantastic. You know, Janice Allred, she was one of the September 6th. She's been going to church for 30 years. And Lavina Anderson, she continued to go to church until she passed away last year. So there are some good cases, but I think the majority of people who get excommunicated just quit going. Margaret and Paul Toscano, they don't go to church anymore. They're both. I include Margaret in the September 6th, even though she's not really, but she is. And Margaret and Janice are sisters too. But I think Margaret and Paul are the more typical, especially when you get excommunicated. Why would you go? Let's see here. I think Deb has a comment here. In my 50 plus years with Community of Christ, I have never sensed a hierarchy in our church. That's fantastic. But I do have a deep respect for our world leaders. I also think we have some of the toxic part with people feeling they aren't heard, but perhaps not as prominent as the LDS members. From what I know, Deb, I would agree with you on that. I think I will say I have holy envy for you guys are more welcoming for diverse opinions than our church is. So finally, David Osler from Bridges, without striving to understand, we can't express the full love of our Savior. We need to value love over conformity. The ultimate metric of a thriving faith community is not how perfectly it maintains its boundaries, but how beautiful it builds its bridges. And so I will conclude with that. So anyway, I just thought I was a little lazy and I wanted to do, I've been wanting to do a twice a month podcast on Sundays. And for whatever reason, I just didn't get around to booking a guest. And I thought, I got to come up with something. And so, and since I had Jeff coming on here, I thought, let's talk about that. Because I was really interested, this 40% number. I really wanted to drill down on that. And I was like, yeah, it's pretty accurate. So anyway, future, I've got Jeff Strong coming up here hopefully this week. Still continuing the Nancy Ross and I can't remember, Jessica Finnegan interview that'll be coming out this week. And I think I'll do a throwback episode with Ugo Perego. We've been having some DNA discussions lately on Facebook, and I had forgotten that interview is it's probably 9 years old now. And I had forgotten that Ugo did a DNA test on Mountain Meadows Massacre. He did one on Joseph Smith, found out he's Irish. Did the big one, we talk about several of the polygamy ones in there. We talk about DNA in the Book of Mormon. We talk about biblical literalism. We talk about the Lemba tribe and the DNA issues there. And so I had forgotten how wide-ranging that interview was, but I will be re-releasing that. So that will be fantastic. Let's see here, Deb. Is there a notification for your live podcast? I just stumbled upon it tonight. That's because I'm not very good at planning, Deb. And so I'm glad you stumbled upon it. I try really hard to do them on hopefully every other Sunday. Oh, I want to do them. There's 5 Sundays in May. I might get one, but the last day of May is the 31st. So I don't know if I'll do one then, but I might. We'll see. If I have a good guest, maybe I'll do it. But yeah, it would be good if I planned these things. Is that what you're telling me? So sometimes I'm just like, I gotta get something out there. So anyway, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you hopefully in 2 or 3 weeks. Enjoy the Nancy Ross episode. I thought that was fantastic. And then we're going to have Jeff Strong coming up and Ugo Perego from almost 10 years ago. But thanks for coming and checking it out. And remember, check us out at ldsfaithjourneys.org. And of course, Gospel Tangents. It looks like we got one last comment here. Bo Paints Minis. I am a big fat nobody in the church. My biggest concern regarding shifting social tide is not trying to get God on my side. I am trying to be on his. And I would agree. I just hope, in fact, I think that's great comment. Sometimes I think we know what God wants more than we know. And then Deb, Ella says hi, podcast Rick. Tell her hi. Give her a big hug for me. All right. Well, with that, I will let you all go. And thanks for tuning in tonight. Appreciate it.